Elijah Smith is the director of debate at Rutgers-Newark University, where he coaches parliamentary and policy debate. 2021 marks his 15th year in participation in the debate community, where he has fond love of all formats of academic debate. The overwhelming majority of that time has been spent advocating for the inclusion of students and coaches from disadvantaged communities. As a college student, he and his debate partner were the first team to unite the crowns of college policy debate by winning the National Debate Tournament and the Cross-Examination Debate Association Championship. This was the first time a team of African-American students had ever won the NDT. He was also chosen to participate in the Japan Debate Tour, where he was the first African-American student given the honor of representing American debate with high school and college debate circuits across Japan. As a coach, he has worked with the winners and top speakers of the TOC and NDCA tournaments, as well as numerous first-round teams in college debate. He is excited to participate in continuing conversations about increasing access in speech and debate. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome with his keynote entitled, Considering All Options, Rethinking Failure in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Elijah Smith.
Ooh, okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. Like I said a little bit earlier, no pressure, and hopefully having something to offer. I don't really come to this conversation thinking that I can instill some, magical message that will completely change diversity and equity work, or that, there's things here that, are not being thought of or talked about in other circles. But I do hope to give you a way to rethink or potentially think about things, from a refreshed perspective that can help us move towards a new year. For some of us in person, for the first time in a long time, for some of us, an entirely new school year with entirely new students and rules, given the equity concerns of the pandemic, and also another year of debate, which for some of us feels like it never stops, given that debate is really, a 365 activity, given that a lot of our friends and family and colleagues are the people who we lean on in times such as, the last couple of years and the pandemic. So today I kind of, was, when I was invited, I was asked by, Kayvon, who works for NSTA, and I've known Kayvon for a number of years. He's one of my friends from high school and college. And he said, I think you do great. I've talked to the folks at the office. They think, you have something to say. And so then, it hits you. You say, well, what am I going to talk about? Why me? What do I have to say? And so I really wanted to try to come up with something that is both timely, but also at the same time related to the kind of issues that we're dealing with within the last couple of years. And so the thing that, I'm actually a little upset about, because I was going to go, that I've thought about was the Olympics. I was going to get to go and see at least 1 or 2 days of the big, crazy, excitement of the 2020 Olympics. The last month or so, we've all seen, I don't know about you, but my Apple News has gone crazy every single day of this person has won gold, this person has dropped out, this person, right, has, is winning, go USA. But it's just been endless coverage. And so I thought, well, I don't entirely want to talk about the Olympics, right? Because, we do debate. Most of us are not quite that coordinated. But I do want to think within the spirit of competition that the Olympics really gives us the ability to think through. Specifically, in the last month, the Olympic conversation has really brought to the forefront a ton of conversations about equity concerns. And so I'm thinking now really specifically about the concerns raised by Black women with ties to the United States, such as Naomi Osaka, Sha'Carri Richardson, and Simone Biles. And this made me realize that I think the goal that I want for this conversation about equity and speech and debate is to think about it from a place that we know really well, is winning and losing. For the most part, we try to teach our students how to win. But today, I kind of want to talk about how do you lose. Failure is something we don't really talk about. We don't say, good job on not doing well. Good job on not making it to ELIMS. Good job on not qualifying to NSCA, which sadly I never got a chance to attend, even though it was one of my dreams of high school. And so we'll play a little violin for that. But I think within progressive discourse, right, thinking about LGBT rights, disability rights, racial and social justice really broadly, we also think about diversity and equity in terms of wins and losses, right? And so I want to take a minute to sit back and reframe losses, to rethink failures, to rethink the moments when winning is just not on the table. And that is potentially strategic as a tool to think about fighting institutional inequity. At the end, I'll provide, a quick question that I want us to kind of discuss in your hallways. And hopefully I'll see you in the hallway. And it'll require a little bit more talking about, because I don't want this to just be me talking at. Many of you know me. Many of you have known me since high school. I'm not really into institutions that much. I'm not really much into authority. I'm a rebel with many causes. And so I don't want you to take this as me kind of instructing, but really being in conversation, and hopefully it can be taken in that spirit. Okay, so I am a product of an urban debate program in Newark, New Jersey. I'm actually in my office right now in Rutgers-Newark. And the debate program at Rutgers-Newark, is one of the pioneer cities when it comes to urban debate and understanding the power, right, that it has on transforming the lives of students who lack access to infrastructure, right? And not to say that only urban students, but because I think in the last couple of years, I've noticed the need for more focus on suburban students as well. And I think there's room to have a conversation. I just happen to be from an urban debate league. So the goal of that program has always been equity. And I think thousands of students who've come through the Newark Debate Program would agree that it has been a success, right? Because many of our alumni go on to be teachers, they go on to be public servants or activists. Most importantly, they go on to graduate, they go on to go to college, they go on to be able to make choices that a lot of us were not in a position to make before we got the mentorship and the critical thinking skills and the networking and really the self-confidence that we had after being a part of Newark Debate. And even right now, I can hear Jonathan Alston's voice screaming from Atlanta, right, in a call and response. I am a Newark debater, right? As a Newark debater, you're not just from Newark, you're not just from your school, you're not just a debater, you are a Newark debater, which is something very unique and you're supposed to be proud of. And it will not be too soon if I don't have him screaming literally in my ear on a bus of kids in my ear of scream it before you go inside. You are a Newark debater, right? And this is not really just, a way to get the kids riled up, to get them excited, but a way to make them realize that despite all of the obstacles that you faced, you are an important and valid part of the debate community. And so despite the need for protection from my eardrums, diversity and inclusion has been a conversation that I've had drilled into me before I realized that I was having this conversation. My first opportunity to participate in this legacy was the New York City Championships in June of 2006, which right now seems like forever ago. It was my first tournament ever. I was very nervous. I was a little bit unsure, but I wasn't scared. I did want to do it. And my coach, Miss Rosenbaum, talked me up. She gave me a pat on the back and she told little 13-year-old me how awesome it was going to be, how much I was going to love it. It was going to be amazing. And I said to myself, well, what do I have to lose? I don't have anything to lose. I'm already a nerd. I'm already hanging around the library. This seems like something I can get down with this. And so I put in a bunch of blood and sweat and tears right into those cases. And I stayed up until 3:00 in the morning, writing and rewriting them till they were perfect. And then I reworked them in the margins in the cafeteria the next morning. And we waited for the paper pairings to be taped to the wall. And like any bad daytime TV show, I was 1,000% sure at the end of this tournament that I was undefeated. There was zero chance in my mind that I lost more than one debate. What I soon found out was that I had a lot to lose. To be precise, I had exactly 3 rounds to lose. And I had done just that. At this tournament, I went 0-3. And for the first time, I found something that I was patently and unforgettably really bad at. And this, for those of you who know me, is not to be confused with football, which I took up the following fall. I did not stick around at football long enough to find out exactly how bad I was at this sport. I'm sure that the team thanks me, and they did win the championship without me, which I think speaks for itself. But for debate, I stuck around and I was up for the challenge. But I had this really complicated relationship to this even more really complicated, beast of an activity. For students in Newark, it was an intellectual challenge that we didn't really have access to prior. I know I didn't in a lot of my classrooms. I also had a ton of equity concerns that I really didn't have language for at the time, right? I was a Black student. I was economically disadvantaged. The judges, the students winning tournaments, and most of the coaches I saw did not really look like me. They had brand new MacBooks. They'd gone to tons and tons of debate camps. They all knew each other, and they didn't really speak to the students that were getting out of our buses. We sat at the tables by ourselves. We were friends with each other. And at most, we might make friends with students from other urban debate leagues that got off of buses from cities near us that looked like us. And then finally, I didn't want to let down Miss Rosie, who sold 3,000 muffins to send me and another student to debate camp. Again, in my life, no pressure, right? So I worked and I worked and I worked and I worked. And eventually people told me, you're getting the hang of it. And I was. And so I started going 3-3. And people come and they pat you on the back and they say, it's okay. You're getting better. It's the process. It's okay. And then I go 4-2. And I was like, yes, deep down in your heart, you know it. You're like, yes. And then I look at that wall and my name is not there because I did not clear on points. And then your heart sinks again. And then I went to an octos bid and I went 5-2. And I said, I know I'm going to be on this pairing. And I looked at this wall again, and my name wasn't there. I did not clear up points, which I'm still a little upset about, if you can tell, but it's okay. We move on, and sometimes we don't. Right, so at this point, I'm like nervous to show up to a tournament. I'm like, I can't clear at a tournament to save my life. And clearly, I was going to fail no matter what I did. And some of you had judged me at these times, and you saw I was not the greatest. And I was like, well, I'm just not the greatest. It's just going to be bad. And I kept going anyway. I knew it was okay. There was more I needed to learn. But there was also this kind of issue, this unspoken rule that a lot of the students that were also winning debate rounds, that also weren't clearing up points, or that weren't winning any kind of trophies, they also looked like me. And so in the back of my mind, I was like, well, we, right? Students that look like me, students that don't have the brand new MacBooks, we just don't clear, and that's okay. So I kept failing, and I got, eventually got scared and tired and frustrated and angry, right, about so many of these things. So one night, again, I'm up working on my cases until 2:00 in the morning. I find this movie on HBO. It's called Never Back Down. And it's a really early 2000s MMA themed thriller, right, that puts the small town Kansas kid against the rich city slicker bully who hosts pool parties at his mansion and who can basically do no wrong. He's the most popular kid in school, right? Classic, right? Young kid. Now, at this time, I didn't actually know that one day I would live in Kansas, but I was like, well, it's unfortunate that you're from that place. So I don't feel sorry for you. But the movie still was one of I think the best things that happened to me, just to come across this movie at 2:00 in the morning, which I should have been asleep. Now, as a coach, I also realized the frustration of trying to get kids to go to sleep when I, as a 14-year-old, was like, I sleep, I don't need that. So the movie, right, plays, unsurprisingly, in fight 1, the kid from Kansas gets laid out in the grass like he stole something. In fight 2, he gets grounded and pounded in a dirty bathroom, and he limps out and pretends nothing's wrong. to his friends to finish a bowl of overpriced nachos. And then, he goes to the gym, run by a coach played by Jimo Honsu, right, and starts soaking up his wisdom, right? Cue training montage and right, angsty early 2000s emo music. And 40 seconds later, he's a master of martial arts. So Jimo Honsu's right kind of post-montage conversation with the protagonist ends with him relaying the lesson that in any fight, you can't get stuck. It's your job to change position, to find a new way to fight, to rethink your strategy, and to figure out a new way to win even when you are losing. I won't leave you hanging. He magically, and I'm sure you're all shocked, he wins fight number 3. Justice is granted, the universe has found balance, and he gets the girl. And you can hear the sounds of the crowd going wild, right, as the emo music fades in and the credits start to roll. So 14-year-old me, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So I take this advice. I say, you know what? It's my job to change position. And so I start beating kids who have 5 or 6 bits of the TOC, right? At 14, all of us are like, winning the TOC literally is the life-defining moment. It is the most important thing. So I'm beating all these kids, but I still can't clear the elims on points. Still failing. I did not get a cool training montage or edgy background music when I entered the tournament or when I lost. And I did not get a cool Brazilian MMA teacher to teach me how to win. I had great coaches, but no montages. So no matter how many times I would change position, as my old debate partner would say, I was taking hot L's. And I just had to learn how to live with it. Shout out to Chris Randall. Thank you for that. So I say all this to say that I, despite the fact that at some point in my debate career, learned how to win debates, I spent the overwhelming majority of my debate career being really good at losing debates. And we didn't really talk about that. It was always, you're going to get better. You're going to get better at debate. But, the nature of a debate tournament is that most of us can't win it. Right? The nature of debate is that somebody has to lose. At least half of us are not going to be in the elims. And that nature of competition, that nature of failure, also applies to the work that we do in terms of equity and diversity and inclusion. And failure is really scary. And it's something that we don't really like to talk about. We're afraid to fail, because society is pretty unkind to those who win in the first place. And it can be super devastating to those who lose. And I think this is particularly true in a world of social media, where information is spread around right faster than it can be created. And so failure is a lesson that I hope, I've shown that I learned this lesson very well. And so thinking about this conversation about failure, I said, well, I'm not the only person who failed at a lot of stuff. And I asked myself about historical failures, right, of other folks who were competing. So the first one, it's not really a true competition on his own, but in terms of the space race, right, I can tell you that Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon. I can tell you that the second, if you give me some time to think, can always eventually remember Buzz Aldrin, or at least one of his names. But how many of you can tell me right now who was the third man on the moon? I found out Michael Collins did in fact walk on the moon about a week ago. But unfortunately, he just passed away this past April, not even 6 months ago. So why didn't I know who this man was? Right? I learned these other folks on a good day, I can remember their names, but according to history, he's a failure. He's not the first, he was not the second. I can tell you, Michael Phelps is a half man, half dolphin. His wingspan is in fact longer than I am tall. I can tell you he won literally a bazillion gold medals in Beijing. I can tell you that was at the time the fastest man alive, not on legs. I cannot tell you a single person who was the third person on any of the podiums in any of his record-breaking races. According to history, all these folks are losers. Because I can tell you Michael Phelps is, and I can tell you he was on a Wheaties box. Can't tell you even their names or their countries or how fast they were going, how tall they are, if I'm taller than them, anything like that. I can tell you many people consider Serena Williams the best tennis player in the world, and arguably she is. She was winning in the most competitive open era of international tennis and won 23 Grand Slams. And I know this because of Michael Jordan, right? 23. So again, I'm thinking about who was the best, who won. I knew her sister Venus was also a phenom in her own right because my mom wanted me to become a tennis star. Again, debate, not coordinated debate, tennis, football, not my thing. As you can see, I'm still here. So obviously I did not find coordination in the last 15 years. So Venus, right, is a phenom, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many of these championships she had won. But I can tell you how many times Serena had been on America's Next Top Model, respectfully. I now know that Venus has won 7 Grand Slams. But despite the fact that they now have a movie coming out about themselves and about their life and about their father, right, starring Will Smith, Serena is the winner and Venus is the loser. She's not the greatest woman alive. She's not the greatest tennis player in history. She's not the best, which means in a lot of our eyes, she has failed. We will forget the things that she has done. We will not know her stats. We will not see her on the side of a Wheaties box. She will not have a cutout at the Models smiling and trying to sell us tennis rackets. And so I really want to think about this context of winning and losing in competition in the context of equity and inclusion, because we also have similar historical failures. We have a ton of third place finishes. Equity and inclusion has legal and social battles that will not be won in our lifetimes, if they are ever won at all. And you are going to take some hot L's. You're going to take a lot of them. We don't talk about failure in terms of taking these L's in diversity and equity and inclusion. And I think that this is really a part of why people burn out and they quit. You believe that you need a big win. You believe that you've got to, get the hot dub, not the hot L. And it's something that even I've been trying to do this type of work. It's really tiring. It's already being a debate coach for the most part is thankless. You argue with your administration because you're not the athletics team. You try to raise money, but people don't understand what you're doing. Why can't you do debate at school? You need money for plane tickets. And they're like, I don't understand why you need to go to this state to debate people when you can debate people in the state that you're at. You want to go to NSDA and you say, well, it's a week-long tournament. It's going to cost us a little bit of money. And they say, well, why don't you just not go to that tournament after 4 years of trying to get there? Most people will not get to work in a corporate job and they will not make $300,000 a year trying to move the needle on access. The conversation you have to have a million times. I, in fact, had particularly nasty, I was called many names, everything but a child of God on Facebook this morning. My mistake, I read the comments, which you should never do. It's a conversation you're going to have a million times. You're going to disagree with people. People are going to come from different perspectives. People are going to call you names. People are not going to listen. People are going to tell you, you don't need to go. Your kids don't need to go. I don't understand why you need this money. And I'm not telling you anything that you haven't heard before. But this is not the kind of nice, it's not the flashy part of the work. Most of the time, it's not going to go the way you want it to. You're not going to get closure. People will at you. They're going to come for you and they're going to yell at you. And so what I want to do is think about 4 different reminders, right, for doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So the first one I want to think about is something that I learned as a graduate assistant, is that equity is a process. It is not an event. I did debate for 6 years between high school and college. And I was only considered a good debater for less than 18 months of my career. Less than 18 months. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted me at their debate camp. Nobody wanted me to be a coach except for, and shout out again to Jonathan Olson, because I was a Newark debater. And for less than 18 months of my debate career, was I someone who was good at debate. I ended up eventually winning the NDT, right? A tournament that 99% of college debaters will never win. I came back with a different partner, and we were only the second Black team in history to finish as a top 5 ranked team after only attending 5 tournaments that year. I have only been invited to work at one national policy debate camp one time. There are many 19-year-old white boys who have gladly accepted these positions. There are many coaches who will tell you that they can't explain to kids how to talk about race, gender, or equity concerns as scholars in debate, but they enjoy the check every summer nonetheless. As you can tell, I am what we call in urban nomenclature, big mad. And I think it's okay to be big mad about that, because the question of who is teaching, what do they get to teach, and why do they get to teach it is generally falls along racialized gender class lines. And it's something that we have to continue to work on. But I don't think that one trophy or one tournament or one lecture or one discussion or one conference is going to change anything about institutions that have existed since before I was born. And so again, in the spirit of the Olympics, I sat back and I really wanted to think about this. And I said, another person I remember from the Olympics is Usain Bolt, right? Fastest man alive. Usain Bolt talks about what it means for him to win. How long did it take for him to win? And he said he trained for 5 years to run 9 seconds. And there was a chance, there's always a chance that in that 9 seconds, he was still going to lose. It was still not going to be fast enough. Unlike the city championships of 2007, I'm no longer arrogant enough to think that I'm going to go undefeated at a game I just started playing. I do not think that the institutions are going to change overnight. And I can't tell you that being anything other than big mad is going to happen over the course of this year or next year or the year after that. 19-year-old white boys are still going to be, right, the winners of the day. They're still going to be the peak of intelligence for many students across America and camps that run based on the profit motive. And so in this, I remind myself all the time, equity is a process. It is not an event. You don't snap your fingers, you don't go to one conference. It doesn't happen overnight. And you have to be okay with that, because the process is valuable even if you in your lifetime do not get to see the event. The second thing I'd like to remind you of is that fights worth having are usually against the biggest bullies. One of the most important organizations in American history is also one of its biggest failures. And I want to take a few minutes to talk to you about the infamous Black Panther Party. This summer, I sent kids I worked with at the Global Debate Symposium a link to the disclosed FBI and CIA documents that list all of the illegal activities that our government took against the Black Panther Party. The kids were in shock. Most of their teachers in the suburbs and non-Black neighborhoods had never talked to them about the Black Panther Party. What they knew, they grasped from movies or articles or offhanded comments from the news, which was a little sad, but again, it's a process. They didn't know that the Black Panthers provided the framework for the meal programs that you see at schools across the country with their free breakfast program. They didn't know that the party provided equal opportunities for Black women and LGBT folks willing to do the work, because they got an infamous narrative about a bunch of violent militants that wanted to destroy America. They didn't know that the party provided healthcare to Black folks across the nation when hospitals turned Black people away. They didn't know that they killed Fred Hampton in a room full of people in the middle of the night to prevent the rise of a, quote, Black Messiah who would change America as we know it. And by change America, that meant fight for equality. I won't go over all the details of that police raid, but you can find it for yourself with a quick Google search, if you so choose to. The students I worked with also didn't know that there are no documented cases of the Black Panthers planning any sedition or treason against the United States. They didn't know any of these things. The Black Panther Party had their 10-point platform. They wanted equality. They wanted work. They wanted justice. They wanted to not have to go to Southeast Asia and to shoot other folks right within the kind of capitalist struggle. So Huey P. Newton, right, raised the question of what it meant to really be a revolutionary. And revolutionaries know their life is going to come to an end. But he begs the question of how do you want to live that life? Even if people in power fight you tooth and nail, you only need to ask yourself if you will look back on your life and regret feeding children, providing them with medicine, and teaching them that they have the same rights as everyone else. If you are here today, the answer to that question is probably no. Your efforts to fight with your administration, to get women into debate, to get racial minorities and students without economic access into debate is always going to be against the biggest bullies. It's going to be against the biggest organizations, against airlines that are charging you $500 for literally a cubbyhole and a bathroom the size of a teacup. But you're never going to look back if you're here today, or if you're watching this video and say, I regret it. Being a revolutionary is not about whether or not your time as a revolutionary is going to end. It's a question of how you spend your time as a revolutionary and what do you do with that time. The third thing I want to remind you of is that you have to enjoy the failures. This one will be blunt and is in fact my favorite section. Comedian Quinta Brunson has a skit that resurfaced as Simone Biles stepped back from the Olympics this last week, where she lampoons the idea that being third in the Olympics is something to be ashamed of. She asks the reporter at the end of this clip, how many times have you won a bronze medal at the Olympics? Just like if you Google it, you can find a picture of a kid at third on the podium and is shouting louder and happier than the kid who won first. The kid in the picture doesn't realize that he didn't win, but he enjoyed the failure more than he enjoyed what everybody else thought. And so I've framed this kind of negatively, but this is the part where I kind of want to rethink things. Even if you are the third person on the moon, you still walked on the moon. Simone Biles earlier today, even though pulling out of half of Olympic events, she won a bronze medal at the Olympics. And people are saying she's a failure. She needs to be kicked into gear. She needs to be kicked in the butt. She still won at the Olympics. Even if no one can name the number of Grand Slams you've won, you still won multiple Grand Slams. Even if you had to swim against a dolphin at the Olympics, even if I don't know who you are or what country you came from, you still got bronze at the Olympics. Even if you never get that big win, you don't get a fight montage, you don't get emo background music as the credits fade in, you did more than most people have ever dreamed of. Even if you never make it to elims of a tournament, was the time you spent learning, practicing, and creating relationships not worthy of a montage? Several of you know that I got in trouble at debate camp as my coach sold those muffins, and we held a fashion show with the garbage bags that I was required to take out for being in trouble. Even though I was not winning any debates, I would not trade my garbage bag fashion show for one more elim debate in high school, because it was one of, despite the fact that I was in trouble, and Ms. Rosenbaum, you now know, sorry, it was one of the best times of high school. I traipsed around the UNT campus, eggs, and I ran away from the dumpster because, it had animals in it. But I still had a great time. Whether or not I ever won the NDT, whether or not I ever made it to elims of a debate tournament. Because the relationships, the practice, the learning, the staying up until 2 a.m., the reading, the academic debates with other 15-year-olds in the backseat of your car is still worth it. You fought hard for equality, diversity, and inclusion, and you also fought harder than most people ever will for anything. Like Quenya, I suggest that you provide the haters with a quick side eye and walk off to go about your business. Because even your failures are better than the alternative. You should play your own music. You should be your own montage. And you should be the kid that won third place that is happier than anyone who won first. Because it's not about whether or not someone else won. It's about what did you get out of the time that you spent in debate. And lastly, I'll leave you with this. You should never, ever back down. Jimoh Hansu yells this title of the film that gave me enough guts to go to tournaments while keeping my breakfast down. He says, you should never back down. You should never give up. And it's really strong accent. It's really inspirational at the time. I'm sure it's more inspirational than me. You should watch the film. It's really good. Right? Because as long as you can take a moment to gain some perspective, you still have the ability to win. But again, even if you haven't won, you still have won. If I had quit debate because of the racist comments I got from judges and competitors and the lack of diversity, there would not be as much diversity in debate as there is today. There would not have been hope in a couple of students around 2013 that needed a small push to stay in the activity. Serena and Venus had slurs yelled at them when they were entering the world stage of tennis. They still wore their hair beads, and they still talked like Compton, and they still moved like Compton, and they still crip walked like Compton, because their father refused to let them do anything less than hold their heads up high and fight harder. Now their biggest concern is if people can keep up with the number of endorsements and Grand Slams. The Black Panthers were 20-year-olds watching their friends be killed for feeding folks that were literally within the same generation as them. If it was not for them, I would not have been able to survive high school. There was not enough money in my household, to pay for breakfast and lunch for 4 years. I would not have stayed in high school. I would not have graduated. I wouldn't have won the NDT. I wouldn't be talking to you today. And it really is inspiring to know that a bunch of 20-year-olds could look death in the face and look into the future and know that little Black kids like myself would need the fruits of their labor, despite the fact people didn't know. And so I'll leave you with this. Fight even when they don't want you to. Fight when they fear the rising of the next Messiah. And fight when you are framed as infamous rather than revolutionary. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't take a break. It doesn't mean that you can't pause and regroup. But your very, very best tool in this fight for equity is finding the grit to never back down from institutions that tell you, your students or your community, that you're worth less and not worth the fight. And those 4 reminders, I will ask you to think about in the hallway. What are ways that you can embrace failure in the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that you are doing at your school, with your students, and in your community? Remember, embracing failure doesn't mean that you can't step back, doesn't mean you can't hit pause or regroup when you need to. Because as we've seen and we've talked about the last 2 years, and sometimes life in general is pretty rough. But in the failures of not getting first, in the failures of history and not being the champion, what are ways that you can embrace failure? And I will send things back to Mr. Wynn.
Thank you so much, Elijah. That was fantastic. That was awesome. Thank you. You gave us some incredible things to think about, and we're not going to let a moment get by. Lauren is going to shoot everybody off into their hallways and give you an opportunity to talk before the next. Thank you, Elijah. That was fantastic.